biggest exotic ornamental right now are common plecos. They're an absolute mess. My favorite experience up inside Koina National Park. This will be a way above human habitation, so completely in the wilds.
Hi, today we have with us somebody who's for the past 4 decades has made his name in the field of conservation, in discovering new species, identifying them, and he's somebody who has written about 18 research papers, has got about 174 citations. He's got a collection of about, in his fish room, about 50 tanks where he's got Peruvians, he's got Brazilians, he's got Africans, he's got Indian natives, and I'm talking only about fish. Okay, so please welcome Rahul G Kumar, who's a well-known ichthyologist and has got so many things to his credit. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to Rahul. Rahul, welcome to the Weekend Aquarist. Why don't you introduce yourself for the audience?
Thank you, Amar. Thank you for having me on the show. Uh, Hello to everyone who's watching this. Very happy to be here. Amar's given a fairly comprehensive introduction to what I am and what I do, so I don't know if I really have to say anything more. Um, so, I'm someone who's been keeping and studying fish pretty much my entire life. I got my first aquarium when I was 5, and it kind of grew from there. Those of you who've been online, a part of the Indian aquarium scene online since about 2000, may know me. Uh, I have the online IDs either Cyclidiate or retro underscore GK. I've been or rather I was active on a lot of the online forums. So some of you might know me. I'm fairly reclusive now, so if you've recently joined the aquarium hobby, then it's quite likely that I'm pretty much a new face. So hopefully over the next hour or so, you'll get to know more about me and what I do and what are the things that I enjoy.
Great, Rahul. Great. So you've been doing research for a really long time, but before you got into it, a little bit about yourself, your education, and what brought you into this line where you became an ichthyologist. So, how did it all happen? If you could just help us understand that career path as well.
Right. My story is probably very similar to that of many people who share a childhood interest in natural history or not necessarily just fish, but any other sort of life around you. So when I was a child growing up in Kerala in the 80s, our house, even though it was in the city, was kind of surrounded by paddy fields, and we had a big koi pond in the front yard. And I'd go out and bring home all the little creepy crawlies that I found in the garden or in the paddy fields around, and have a I had a row of glass jars, Horlicks bottles and Bonvita bottles on my windowsill with tadpoles and frogs and fireflies and the odd gecko or something like that. Uh, and At some point, my parents started worrying that I'd start bringing home more dangerous animals, especially snakes, I suppose. So then they hatched upon this clever plan to kind of focus my interest into one area. And so for my fifth birthday, they got me an aquarium, which is one of those um, a small one, like a 2 foot steel or aluminium framed glass tank, and we got a handful of fish, some guppies, and I think a couple of angelfish or something in there. And guppies being guppies, they produce a lot of babies, and Then I started handing them out to friends at school, and some of them gave me fish from their tanks or fish that they caught in the gutters or the irrigation canals near the house. And so after about a year or so, we had about 8 or 9 various vessels, buckets, and cement tanks and things holding fish. And it kind of took off from there. It kind of became a lifelong obsession of sorts. And that led me to studying zoology in college. And after my bachelor's, I was kind of stuck between whether I wanted to study marine science or marine biology, or whether I wanted to study fisheries science. Fisheries science would have been the obvious choice if you wanted a job, because there weren't many opportunities for marine biologists back in the day. Uh, but then uh, eventually I ended up studying environmental science, which was a bit of a boon and a bane. I mean, I got a much wider exposure to many other things that are kind of parallel to our hobby, water quality and hydrology and things like that. And then I went abroad for a few years. That was a great time. I went to the US. I was in California for 5 and a bit years. Um, I had the opportunity. So this was right around the time where internet access for the general public was really taking off. So late 90s, early 2000s. The Indian aquarium hobbyist scene was taking off. The IAH group formed, and the Indian Aquarium Hobbyist website and forums were launched around that time. Um, so I got in touch with a number of fellow hobbyists from around the world around then via the internet. There were groups based out of Singapore and Europe and North America. And then when I got there, I had the opportunity to join my local fish club, or a local fish club, Coast. It was a California organization of aquarium show tropicals. They're based out of Orange County. And then via that group, I was able to get in touch with many other aquarist groups across the country. I got to travel to a lot of shows, the American Cichlid Association convention, the Killifish Association convention, various other hobbyist groups that met different places. Uh, so I met a lot of very, very, very interesting people. I learned a lot of things, including some people who you'd consider to be the doyens of the hobby. Paul Loisel, uh, Rosario Lacorte. I didn't get to really meet him. I only spoke to him quite a bit on the phone, and then quite a few of the hobbyists in California, and then somewhere around 2005, while I was back home on vacation, um, I went out into one of the Western Ghats streams, and I caught some fish and I took some pictures, and I did a little slideshow back at the aquarium club there, and someone told me that what you should do, you should really document more of the native diversity in the Western Ghats, because there's very little information on that out there. So that kind of put an idea into my head, and then when I came back to India in 2007, that kind of took root deeper and started taking shape. I got into a corporate job at that point, early edutech, what do you call it, test prep kind of thing. Worked there for 3 years while going out into the Western Ghats every weekend and taking pictures, catching fish, doing that sort of thing. And I got to meet several Indian scientists who were working on fishes around that time. And uh, I kind of got into the idea that maybe this is something that I should do full time. And around 2010, actually, I quit my job. So I had my fish room here. I had a fairly decent fish room in California, about 17 tanks, I think. I had to dispose of all of that when I came back here, and then I converted my car shed at home into an even better fish room that had about 50 tanks. So, and I was kind of raising mostly exotics at the time, a lot of discus and angelfish and apistogramma, which are kind of my apistos are sort of my thing. And I was actually making decent money at the time selling the fish that was spawning in my tanks, and I figured, okay, I can, do this full time, and if that pays all the bills, that gives me more time to go out into the Western Ghats and document stuff. So I quit my job and I started raising fish full time. And around that time, I was offered a position as a researcher with a government research institute, the National Bureau of Fish Genetic Resources, and I
Mm.
joined them in 2012. And for the next 10 years, till 2022, I pretty much spent most of my time traveling up and down the Western Ghats and catching, not always catching, but observing fish in a lot of different places. It was great. About 150 days a year, I'd be out somewhere in the field. And in the field, I mean fairly remote places where there are very few people, or where people don't really live. There's no human habitation there. Pristine habitats, which are all sadly disappearing at a very rapid rate. And um then, somewhere towards the end of the pandemic, I stepped down from that job and decided to go back to raising fish full time. So that's what I do now. I have another fish room that has, again, about 50 tanks, lots of different fish. And I do a little bit of research on the side, I do a little bit of consulting on the side, and still go out and look at fish on the weekends.
That's so great. Yeah, that's so great. I mean, a lot of us, would say that okay, that's a great dream job, but I will hold on to that. I'll come back to you and your experience, because a lot of our viewers would want to know that. So for since I'm talking about viewership, and for the viewers, I don't know whether they have connected this, but the latest edition of the Weekend Aquarist has got this feature, the feature on Bhavania australis, and this article has been written, contributed by Rahul G Kumar, and I don't know whether you've got your hands on it so far, but if you have not, you should get this. Such a beautiful article, and the photographs are from Rahul and his dear friend, our dear friend Beta Mahatwaraj. Okay, so that's Rahul's photograph over here. I don't know whether you could see it properly. Yeah. So Rahul, Bhavania. Okay. You know what's so special about this particular fish? I've heard Beta also kind of gush over it. He's almost like he's in love with it. But what's your experience with Bhavani australis?
Right. So, just a little bit of background info. The Western Ghats and, well, the Himalayan ranges, for example, India is home to many species of homelopterid loaches, which are, what we commonly call as hill stream loaches. They are highly specialized fishes with expanded fins, and they have specialist requirements in terms of high flow, cool waters, high
Hmm.
oxygen content. They're specialized for life in torrents. And while there are multiple species in India and Southeast Asia, you get a lot of them in the trade now as butterfly loaches or butterfly plecos. Uh, Many of them are not really suited for aquarium life in that they're extreme specialists, right? They require a lot of
Hmm.
flow
Hmm.
or very high oxygen concentrations, which we cannot really provide in an aquarium, and they're not really
Hmm.
suited as community fish. But Bhavania is one of the few which actually is somewhat suited for life in the average aquarium, in that they don't really require very high oxygen concentrations or very low temperatures, so you don't need a chiller. If you can provide clean water and good aeration, they're reasonably uh, happy living in an aquarium. And they also grow quite somewhat large, about um, 8 to 10 centimeters is a large fish. You typically get them around 6-7 centimeters, so they can hold their own against peaceful tank mates, say small barbs or danios or things like that. So you can keep them in some sort of community setup, and they're also fairly easy to feed in that they're not diet specialists. So you can
Hmm.
feed them
Hmm.
frozen bloodworms or high quality pellets.
Hmm.
They'll eat that. So from a husbandry perspective, Bhavania australis is probably the easiest Indian hill stream loach to keep, and probably the only one that should be kept because none of the others really live very long in aquarium conditions, but Bhavania does reasonably well.
It's a beautiful fish. I've heard Beta say that it also changes its patterns, and no two fish are exactly alike. So wanted your thoughts also on that. Maybe
Yes,
I'm wrong, but I recollect that. Okay, yeah.
right. So that's true of almost all the hill stream loaches. While they have, generally uh, the same pattern in the sense that they have 7 to 9 bars on the back or 2 bars on the pectoral fin, but the pattern of spots on the side is distinct for every single fish, and they do if you provide really good conditions, and by good conditions I mean clean water, lots of oxygenation, you'll find that the real and proper diet, you'll find that they really color up with nice orange, reddish orange fins, and you get a little bit of a red blush on the body. And that it's kind of understated, but if you do provide the right conditions, they're a really, really pretty fish.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for that. So let's talk about I'm going to be a little selfish over here, so I'm going to talk about the Indian natives first. Okay, and then we'll go to the exotics also. In the Indian natives, which are some of your favorite native fish? And when I say native fish, I'm referring to the native ornamentals. Again, a little selfish over here because of the aquarium side of the hobby. So, what are some of the beautiful fish that are not so well known, but those are well suited for the Indian aquariums, or rather the aquariums worldwide?
Right. So, again, my definition of a good aquarium fish is something that stays small and will accept a wide range of foods. So, in that context, I think my favorite native ornamental fish would be some of the small barbs, some of the pethia, or some of the small puntias, or haludaria, which are really small, really colorful, and adapt really well to aquarium conditions. Or some of the Indian danios. They're some of the prettiest fish you find in our streams here, Dangila or Meghalayensis, or there's even the common zebra danio. Uh,
Mm.
and they're very much the perfect aquarium inhabitants. They're peaceful, they don't bother other fish, they eat everything, they're active all the time, they're out in front of the tank. So, for most people, they're a really good aquarium fish. And my favorite Indian native barb would probably be Wycomia sahyadriensis, or the Maharaja barb. Again, it's brilliantly colored. They have very interesting behavior in the sense that males form little what I call leks, as in they're little spawning territories that are about a foot square, centered around a bed of pebbles or a couple of rocks, and the males display in front of it, and they try to attract females there, and they spawn. Um, so, in terms of color, I don't think there's any other barb that really comes close to Wycomia. I mean, they've got metallic purples and oranges and black and
Wow.
contrasting white. But the only problem is they really need a species tank to be
Mm.
happy, in that
Mm.
they're very bad at competing with other fish. So, if you have the capacity to set up maybe a 3 foot tank with maybe two males and about 4 or 5 females in it. Not many plants, just a gravel bed, couple of big rocks on opposite ends of the tank where the males can establish
Right,
territories.
right.
Maybe a piece of driftwood in the middle to break the line of sight. And then you'll have, something that will keep you entertained for hours on end. I mean, the males will display constantly. They'll try to attract the
Wow,
females. They don't eat their fry, so you'll eventually have a lot of Sahyadria, or
wow.
not Sahyadria, sorry, Wycomia. Uh, but the only thing is, it has to be a species tank. They don't really compete well with other fish. Maybe you can keep them with some of the small danios, zebra danios, or um, what used to be in Brachydanio. But anything larger than an inch long, maybe Pethia gelius would go with these, but anything larger than an inch long will probably outcompete Wycomia when it comes to food or territory or anything of that sort. And another thing is that all the Wycomia that you get are wild caught. so they will most probably carry some sort of parasite or the other. So you'll have to deworm them as soon as you get them, if you want them to have the best quality of life. But if you can set up a species tank for these are amazing, amazing fish, and you won't
Right.
regret that.
Right. Just a word of I don't know what, but you it's so it's so beautiful to kind of hear you rattle off all the scientific names. Most of us are used to the common names. So
Right.
just for the audience, we will be showing the fish and the common names also along with the scientific names. Okay, so that's just a you know thing
Sorry,
that I
sorry for
wanted to
that. It's
share.
it's actually easier
No,
for
no,
me to
not at
keep
all.
track with the
Not at all.
scientific
Not
names
at
than
all.
the common
I
names.
think it's important for us as hobbyists and for people as who are interested in knowing more to also understand the scientific part of it also. So it's just not the common name. So but this is for the audience to not to get worried about. We'll obviously have this coming up also. uh, Talking about this, you've done so many research papers, you've done so many research expeditions in the Western Ghats. What are some of the ones? Is there anything that really stands out that you could share with us as an experience, or something that you have observed that really stood out?
There are lots of things actually. My favorite experience, but it's that unfortunately does not involve any fish. We were
Sure.
up inside Koina National Park, and way above. This is the headwaters of the Krishna River, and one of the tributaries of the Krishna. And this will be a way above human habitation, so completely in the wilds. Pristine stream. One of the few places in India, I think, where you can actually drink the water from the stream and not have to worry about any sort of pollutants in the water or anything of that sort. Absolutely crystal clear water. I mean, you could walk in the water and not disturb any sediment. Not very many fish there, unfortunately, or fortunately, well, because we were really high up. But the habitat there was so clean. Or, if I may go to another location, that was when I was in Arunachal Pradesh a couple of years back. Not in the Western Ghats, this is in the Eastern Himalayas. Again, places where there have been no human habitation for really ever. And the water there is so clear when you see all these videos on YouTube or you watch shows on National Geographic and you see them, see people go with their cameras into crystal clear water. And most waters in India where there are people around uh, are generally kind of have some amount of sediment or silt or
Right.
something in them. But when you go to these places where there are no people around and you see this absolutely clear water there, even if you don't see the fish, it's just sitting there by the riverside or sitting on a rock in the middle of the river and just watching the water flow by and seeing all the little things out there. You see a lot of dragonflies, damselflies. You see butterflies, the common nawabs and the rajas. Well, depending upon where you are, different butterflies in different places. But you do see
Hmm.
clouds of butterflies coming and sit on the bank just to drink water or to puddle for salt. Uh, and then you have all the bird life in the trees, whether they're drongos or shamas in the Western Ghats, or maybe hornbills, greys or pied hornbills, and it's incredible. I mean, it's almost like what some people would say is a religious experience, where you just sit there and you forget about everything else, and you just, and uh, there are so many things striking you at once that it's often hard to concentrate on the one thing. But it's incredible, and if everyone or anyone has the opportunity to do that, I strongly recommend that you take it. With the caveat, don't leave any trash there. Don't pluck
Yeah.
anything or take anything from there. Just go there, sit quietly, enjoy the ambience. Like think of it as a symphony or a stage performance where you've been invited as the sole guest, and you sit there and you soak in on everything, and just take the experience away. Don't even take your camera there. Your camera takes away from the experience. Seriously, just go there, sit there, enjoy, come back. But if you want fish specific things, um, my favorite would be, well, there are lots of favorites, but would probably be somewhere. There are these fish sanctuaries in many places in the Western Ghats, right? In Kerala, in Karnataka, in Maharashtra, there are these stretches of river. Excuse me. Usually next to a temple, where the fish are considered holy, or they considered the property of the deity at the temple. So
Right.
nobody fishes there for a kilometer upstream or downstream, and there's no the water there is also not generally used for anything there. There's no agriculture used there. So the water is pretty clean. And you see a lot of these large uh, barbs and some large catfish that you don't normally see out in the rivers in numbers. They all congregate there because they're safe from being caught. And there are the usual suspects. You get mache there, obviously, but you also get labio. You get some really large hypsilobarbus, uh, Giordani or Pulchellus or Kuralai or Thomasai or Lithopidos. And you get to see even some of the common barbs, some of the common Dawkinsia and things, they grow to sizes that we don't normally associate with them. Like I've seen Dawkinsia
Wow.
that are easily over 10 or 12 centimeters in length, and
Wow.
to just sit in the water, maybe with a snorkel, you just go into the water there and see them display. It's really magical. But the drawback to that again is once you see them in that condition in the wild, you don't really feel like keeping them in an aquarium anymore, because then you realize that you cannot easily recreate that sort of habitat in the wild,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Like just this past weekend, I was out with Beta at a stream in the Western Ghats where he wanted to photograph Dawkinsia denisonii. So we went to a really quiet stream that has no people nearby, and it was fairly shallow, like maybe 2 feet knee deep water, but crystal clear again. But the flow in places is really strong. We're talking thousands of liters of water flowing by per second, and you see these fish just happily hanging around in that current, and then you realize that you cannot really provide that kind of a habitat easily in a home aquarium, and
Right.
and the colors you see on those fish are something you'll never see in an aquarium. So it's
Right.
a double-edged sword. Being out in the wild
Yeah.
is fabulous, but then you never look at your tanks the same way again, because every time you look at your tank, you see you
It's not going to come any close
exactly.
to
It's like
the
a cheap
nature.
imitation of the real thing. So you know that's what
What's
it is.
what's what's your personal philosophy when it comes to, keeping fish, any fish for that matter? If you are going to keep them, obviously you want to kind of give them the best. So what's your personal philosophy on this?
So my basic philosophy on fish keeping is that uh, you should really only keep fish that you can spawn in your tanks, right? So I'm generally against monster fish or anything that grows over a foot in length, because it's really hard to set up a tank at home that can adequately house fish like that. So generally, I prefer to keep really small fish that have an adult size of maybe 10 centimeters or so, where you can easily keep a group of them, in a average 2 foot or 3 foot tank at home. You can put in lots of live plants. You can scape it, make it look like the actual habitat, and uh, you can then really see the fish interact with each other and with other things, with their environment, like they would do in the wild to some extent,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that really is the essence. So I really only keep fish that I can spawn. If the fish are not spawning in my tanks, it's uh, to me that is a sign that I've failed as a fish keeper, right? So
Right.
I've not provided
Right.
them with the conditions that they need to be truly happy. So that would really be my philosophy, in that to uh, really uh, be a good fish keeper, you really should be able to provide uh, the conditions that your fish needs. Right? As an aquarist, you should really be looking at the happiness of the fish rather than thinking of what happiness the fish gives you. So it's it's a very rather it's a somewhat unpopular opinion, I suppose. And I will not judge anyone for wanting to keep monster fish, but me personally, I would not keep anything that grows beyond, say, uh, 20 centimeters max, because I think my largest tank is 6 feet. So I wouldn't want to keep anything more than about a 20 centimeter long fish in that.
Right. In your tanks, I read in one of the notes. I think when Beta introduced me is to you, is that you have spawned about 200 variety species of fish from over the world, exotics and all included. So why don't you share some of those stories also? I mean, keeping some fish happy, but keeping 200 different varieties and having them spawn is something else. So just wanted to hear you from about that as well.
I mean, it's actually fairly simple. So, a lot of fish require similar conditions across genera. Or fish that come from similar biotopes require fairly similar conditions. So, my main interest in fish was cichlids, and cichlids are ridiculously easy to spawn once you give them the conditions that they need. They'll do everything on their own. They have excellent parental care. So you just have to
Yeah.
set up a tank that they like, and then they'll do everything on their own. So I'd say about 30 to 40% of the fish that I've spawned are cichlids. Um, then a lot of barbs. Barbs are again very easy to spawn because they're not very picky about water quality. They just need they're just triggers. You just figure out what triggers them. Maybe a water change with clean water, maybe a water change with cool water. Maybe some of them require a specific kind of spawning substrate. Some of them will only spawn over gravel. Some will only spawn in floating plants. Some will only spawn in plants on the bottom of the plant or the tank. So once you figure that out, it becomes really easy. So once you figure out something for one fish, or a group of, so all the other fish in the genus that are closely related to it kind of will spawn in a similar way. So it becomes fairly easy to do that. It's just kind of figuring out what the triggers are and setting up the tank with the conditions that the fish really want. Water parameters aren't really that important as we make it out to be, so long as you're not giving them something that's drastically different from their natural habitat.
Natural
They'll
state.
they'll be
Yeah.
fairly happy. So you just it's just a matter of it's like a snowball rolling downhill, right? The first couple of species are probably the hardest, but once that is done, it just becomes easier. And uh, probably the hardest thing is really getting live feeds. I probably spend more time maintaining my live food cultures than I do maintaining my aquaria, because
Which are some of the cultures, if you don't
right.
mind sharing
So
those?
I keep vinegar eels, microworms, grindleworms, moina, earthworms, and I collect because I live in Kerala where we have a lot of Drosophila fruit flies out in the wild. All I do is I put out a bottle with some overripe banana in it, and I usually can catch sufficient number of fruit flies to feed all of my fish in a couple of hours. So I don't culture fruit flies; I just collect them from the wild. Plus, I have a reasonably good garden out here, so I get a lot of grasshoppers and things out there. So I feed those to the fish as well. But the vinegar eels, the microworms, the grindleworms, uh, they're fairly easy once you've got your culture stabilized and running. Moina takes the most work because the culture tends to crash, so you have to make sure that the water quality in the Moina cultures is stable and within the range preferred by them, and you have to keep subculturing it every 5 to 7 days, or you're guaranteed to lose that. So that takes up a lot of work. I used to culture tubifex and blackworms until before COVID. I lost all those cultures during the COVID break. But those are also fairly easy to culture if you have the space somewhere around your house where it's shady, not too warm, and you can provide a little bit of running water. Those are fairly easy to culture. But I don't really advocate feeding blackworms or tubifex to your fish on a regular basis. It's just something that you use maybe once or twice a month just to condition fish for spawning or something like that. I don't use it as a staple feed. But moina absolutely necessary if you're trying to breed anything seriously. It's fantastic. You can feed adult moina to the adult fish. Again, remember that all my fish are uh, less than 10 centimeters or so in size, so they all eat moina. And the newly hatched moina, fantastic feed for fry. Even freshly hatched cyprinid or barb or tetra fry will feed on moina. So once I have, when I'm spawning something, as soon as I see that the eggs have hatched and I've got little fry sticking on the walls, it takes 3 days or so, or 48 hours, 48 to 72 hours after hatching before the fry are free swimming and start feeding. I flood all the tanks with live moina and a little bit of green water. The moina feed on the green water, and the fry feed on the moina, and I don't have to really worry about much. They take care of themselves. So that's the easiest thing to do. If there's only one food you can keep moina.
Okay. So interesting. I mean, you just mentioned that you wouldn't feed black worms as a staple, uh, but these days you get Australian black worms. Those are the dried, sterile ones. Would you? Because a lot of us, including me, I feed Australian black worms. The small
Mm-hmm.
cubes and all. Is that something that you would feed, or are you only referring to the live ones that
Uh,
are a concern?
I would really use these as a treat rather than a staple food. No more than
Mm,
once a
mm,
week, personally.
mm,
Unless,
mm.
other than for a very small subset of fish that do require a high protein diet. But for most, I would say 90% of aquarium fish, commonly available aquarium fish, the best food is a good quality pellet. I'm a huge fan of hikari. I've been using hikari for 30 odd years now, and it's they have products for everything. Vibrabits is a staple food. It's the best thing. I use hikari algal tabs for all my plecos and fish that need herbivores. I also like their sinking mini pellets for corridoras and loaches and the like. Uh, it's a really good food. It's very well made. Hikari has their science and R&D down to an art, and you can't go wrong with that. It doesn't pollute the water.
Right.
It is expensive, yes, but uh, it's pretty much a feed and forget sort of food. I don't have to worry about any sort of parasites getting in or any sort of pollution
Right.
in the water, anything of that sort. And then you can
Right.
use all these freeze dried or frozen feeds as a treat, maybe once or twice a week or even less. So the number one reason that fish die in captivity is overfeeding, and not directly from
Yeah.
overfeeding, but overfeeding leads to obesity. It can lead to other health effects, and more importantly, it leads to poor water quality. Uh, it's much better to underfeed than to overfeed, because again,
Right.
fishes are poikilotherms, or what we call cold-blooded animals, and they so from for a mammal or a bird or for a warm-blooded animal, roughly half the calories we consume are spent on maintaining our body temperature. But
Mm.
fishes don't have to expend any or very little energy to maintain their body temperature, so they require very little food. Right? So um, if you take a fish that weighs 5 kilos and say a rabbit that weighs 5 kilos, the fish would need maybe 10% of the feed that the rabbit needs, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
feed very little, and use all the high protein feeds as an occasional treat. As again, once a week, maybe
Right.
twice a week at the most. I wouldn't use it as a daily feed.
Wow. That's an interesting insight. Also, thank you so much for that. Uh, just out of curiosity, again, um, your experience when it comes to you also mentioned that at very high altitudes, pristine waters, you didn't see the fish and all, and then I'm sure the fish start appearing slightly as you come lower down. But when you come down to human populations and where the human population interacts, and obviously the water starts also getting polluted, in your observation across the Western Ghats, across the other states and regions that you have visited, what is the condition of invasive species, fishes that are appearing in these bodies now? And that's a direct, I think, impact of young hobbies or whatever hobbies getting into it and then realizing, hey, this is much bigger than I thought I could. manage?
Right. So we do have a fairly significant issue with exotics in natural water bodies. But really, the only ornamental or aquarium related fish that's causing a problem, and it is a huge problem, are common plecos. Right? They are
Mm.
everywhere. Every single river system in India has common plecos now. They grow to very large sizes in the wild. They breed like rabbits. Fishermen won't catch them because they shred nets, and they basically they both outcompete native grazers, labio or gara or other similar fish. They eat fish eggs, so they cause a massive problem, and it's unclear if we'll ever be able to eradicate them from the wild again once they're established. But other than that,
Mm.
all of the other exotics that we see come from aquaculture. I mean, as they're all food fish that have escaped into the wild, tilapia or common carp or African catfish, Clarius garaepinus.
Mm.
Um,
Mm. Mm.
and they may not. I mean, garaepinus, the jury's still out on how bad they're going to be for the environment. But tilapia, in some places, yes, they do outcompete native fish, but in most places, they kind of sort of reach a balance because young tilapia fry, for example, provide food for some of our native predators, Zinentodon needlefish or chana or something like that. Um, there are places where where the only fish you'll find are tilapia, but then again, it's also that they are highly adaptive, and those waters may not support a lot of native fish too. But other than that, the only other ornamental fish that you come across in the wild are live bearers that are again been mostly been deliberately introduced for mosquito control. You get guppies, you get gambusia, you get
Mm.
swordtails, you find platies in some places, but those have all mostly been introduced for mosquito control. And you find mollies in coastal brackish water habitats in some places. Again, I think they've been introduced into drains for mosquito control, and then they've kind of escaped into the wild from
Yeah.
there. But again, they're not as big a problem. The biggest exotic ornamental right now are common plecos. They're an absolute menace. And they've been in the wild for quite some time. I think the first reports were in the mid 90s from wetlands around Kolkata. And since then, we've found them everywhere. They're in the drains in Trivandrum, where I am now. You find them in the wild pretty much in every major river system. The Kaveri is full of them. They're in the Tungabhadra. They're in many of the smaller west flowing rivers, and it's a huge issue. So uh, if you are an aquarist listening to this, please don't buy common plecos. And if you do buy common plecos, please don't throw them into the wild if they outgrow your tank, right? It's better to just euthanize them, stick them in the freezer for half an hour or so, they'll die peacefully, and then you can chuck them in the trash or in the garden, whatever. Don't release them into the
Mm.
wild. A bigger
Mm.
issue, though, that I should mention is that when you release aquarium fish into the wild, even if they don't survive and they get picked off by water birds or other fish, they do run the risk of introducing pests or diseases into the wild, right?
Mm.
Our aquaria are home to a lot of parasites and bacterial pathogens that normally wouldn't be present in the wild. And when you release these fish or aquarium fish into natural water bodies, you run the risk of introducing those diseases into the wild, and that can be a huge problem.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I just didn't realize that it's been 40, almost 45 minutes since we started. Uh, Before I'd like to also say that I would love to have this conversations with you. Occasionally we'll have this continue, but before we kind of close this one, and I so want to kind of continue with this, but uh, let's have your thoughts on. There's a lot of viewers watching this. If they want to pursue a career, in fishery science, if they want to pursue a career in environmental, what's the advice you would give them? in this day and age, in 2025 and onwards, what's it that you would say?
Um, the well, two or three things. One is that uh, develop a habit of reading the literature, right? It's a very useful, especially if you're going into a career as a researcher. It's very important that you develop the habit of reading manuscripts or books in detail, not just the abstract and the conclusions, but the materials and methods, seeing what they've done, going through the data, uh, reading their observations, right? Go through the references, track down other papers that talk about similar things. Uh, get into the habit of really going down into the nitty gritty with the literature. You learn a lot of different things. You don't need a degree to read the literature, right? So long as you can read English, you can read the literature. So you can start even if you're still in school. Read the papers. You'll find that almost all of the authors will have their contact information in the papers, their email addresses, sometimes phone numbers. Don't call them, please, but you can send them emails. You can ask them questions. You can That's what I did when the internet became a thing around 96, 97. I would send off emails to people whose manuscripts I had read, and I started up conversations with a lot of people and started up friendships that still exist to this day. So you make contacts, you learn lots of different things. And then from a careers perspective, decide whether there are two different branches, right? Whether you want to study systematics, ichthyology, taxonomy, that's one side of it. Whether you want to study aquaculture, fish breeding, or something like that, that's another side of it. They're two very different streams. If you want to study taxonomy or systematics, you're better off studying zoology, and then taking it from there. If you're interested in breeding fish or aquaculture, you're better off studying fisheries science or aquaculture and then taking it from there. And both fields are uh, learn by doing fields, right? You get better at it the longer you spend at it, and it really does take a few years of work before you are actually good enough to do anything. So you have to put in the work. There are no shortcuts. If you want to become an aquaculturist, or you want to breed fish, whether it's food fish, tropical fish, whatever, or you want to breed fish for conservation, uh, you start by you learn by breeding fish, right? You can read about all these methods and technologies and textbooks and whatnot, but unless you actually start breeding the fish, you won't really get an idea of um, what really needs to be done. So start small, maybe start with guppies, start with goldfish, start with whatever, but uh, observe your fish, see what it takes to raise the fry, uh, observe how eggs develop, how what are the problems, what are the things that can go wrong, right? Stocking densities are a big thing, filtration, figuring out feeding. Those are all things that you learn by doing. So once you do that for a few years, you get better at it. Same thing with taxonomy. You um, sit in a museum or you sit in a lab and you hunch over a microscope and you examine hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of specimens. You count scales, you recount them, you take measurements, you compare with something else, right? And that's how you really uh, get to be good at it. There are no shortcuts. Please don't use AI or ChatGPT to summarize papers for you. Read the papers, read the books, right? It takes time, yes, but that's what makes you a good scientist. There are no shortcuts to being a good scientist. So if you're not really
Right.
prepared to spend the hours doing all the dirty work, you really cannot expect to be a good scientist. So
Wow.
put in the time.
Thank you so much for that advice. And I'm
I'm afraid I'm
sure.
scaring away a lot
Uh,
of future scientists,
no,
but
no,
that's
not at all. I think it's important also, and especially like I said, in 2025, where AI is everywhere, and obviously we need to know, there are limitations. Of course, we don't want AI replacing our intelligence, so
yeah.
it's important to kind of keep ourselves sharpened. Uh, but Rahul, it's been such a pleasure having you
Well,
on the
thank you for
Weekend
having me. It's
Aquarist
wonderful being
podcast,
here.
and let's continue with this. And thank you so much, and looking forward to the next time very soon.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Looking
much.
forward to being on here again.